Have you spent years raising your awareness, healing, and trying to manifest a different light, yet still feel like something unseen is standing in your way? Most teachings tell you to bypass the mind, raise your frequency, and focus on the light. But what I've learned after 10 years of studying this and living it is that light and darkness go hand in hand. Every block, every restriction, every ceiling on your growth holds entity interference. And if you want the highest transformation possible, you have to be willing to work at the highest levels, which means learning to command the darkness, not just reach for the light. I'm Tracey Gillies, and I've spent the last decade commanding and releasing demonic and multidimensional entity interference at the highest levels. I literally wrote the book on it. In this episode, I'm sharing what 10 years of studying conscious expansion actually taught me, and why the most important thing I ever learned had nothing to do with the light. Consciousness expansion. Wow, it's kind of like a big buzzword. Everybody's talking about it, especially in the realms of manifestation and just, spiritual development and growth. But a lot of people are not talking about the darker side to transformation. And usually what I have found over 10 years of actively engaging, healing myself, navigating these spiritual realms, and the spiritual can be beautiful but terrifying at the same time, is that no one is talking about dark entity interference, and that being one of the lead issues with people that can't create, manifest, align, create that transformation that they truly deserve. And what I feel like in the market is almost the blind leading the blind. So many people don't work with these influences, don't understand them, don't know them. If you're not working with entity interference, then you're missing that other equation, and you can't heal, you can't elevate out of what you can't see. So a lot of people are blind to these influences and understanding just how much they can control somebody's destiny. Don't know if I love that word destiny, but essentially it's almost like someone's sovereignty, being able to elevate out of decline, being able to up level. And a lot of the teachings in the marketplace are almost like, uniform. They're kind of like everybody's just regurgitating and rehashing kind of the same spiritual information. And what is that? That we're all this infinite being. Yes, that is true. Yes, that is true. But that we're all kind of interconnected, and we need to be connected at our heart space. And if we just kind of do all this, sitting in these higher alignments and frequencies, and often it's bypassing the mind is what is kind of talked about. No, the mind is one of the key things that we have to elevate out of decline, out of enslavement. Even entity interference attaches to the mind. It's the biggest attachment mechanism there is. But in order to expand consciousness, you can't bypass. You have to heal, recover, realign neurological structures enough to be able to hold a higher vibration, a higher frequency source. That is elevation, that is expanded consciousness. And so there is many ways to work with that. And over the years, I studied a lot. I've learned a lot about physicality, the body, organs and glands, neurological expansion, all of these things, but all underpinned by spiritual re-regulation, because it's the highest spiritual matrices. It's our spiritual template that inform physicality, right? It's the reordering for everything. It's like kind of a master template. But at this high level of spiritual development, there is a lot of entity interference. And what I've learned over time is that entity interference goes hand in hand with all blocks and restrictions. That might shock some people here. When you start working with entity interference, you realize the vastness of it. Don't get me wrong, there's many different layers and levels to different types of entity interferences, and they kind of can create subtle restrictions for a person to huge overarching deregulation, or even stealing someone's whole progression path, as in cutting in and actually severing them from their spiritual connection. But a lot of people are not talking about this other side. They simply reference light and re-regulation, but you can't touch light at those higher reordering levels. You can't elevate unless you kind of release these types of restrictions that go hand in hand with that. So, I've spent many years, one, I was really just searching to heal myself and even opening up to the spiritual pathways of, understanding the soul and re-regulation. And it's magical and it's amazing. But what I also find is consciousness can almost get derailed. Consciousness can almost get cut into when people start doing so much spiritual seeking. And over the years of doing all of this healing work that I've done and kind of venturing into the path of specializing in entity interference, I just see so many people that get enslaved through that doorway of trying to elevate, and they seek, like I would call it, a spiritual seeker, right? And they are searching for this higher alignment in themselves. But honestly, I just see more and more people making a bigger mess for themselves. Makes me really sad. And it's all to do with this. It's all to do with entity interference. Even understanding entity interference, even understanding those realms are not just a playground. People kind of get in over their heads. They just think that it's all light and love or all of this higher expansion, and there's not. It's like a sea of beings. It's a sea of teachings. And all teachings are not necessarily in alignment to somebody's highest spiritual alignment. With conscious connection points or our own spiritual templates, we're actually all completely different. We actually all have kind of slightly different variations to our templates, to our gifts, the way that we're here, obviously to express ourselves into this physicality or manifest. The story of our soul is kind of different. So I see a lot of people chasing endless spiritual expansion, and in it, they almost create a misalignment to their highest path progression. And in it, there's a lot of misteachings, and anything that holds misinformation is also a doorway for more and more entity interference. There's a lot of interference that masks as light frequency, that masks as higher alignments and upliving, but it's not. And over time, it erodes sovereignty. Over time, it erodes a person's kind of divine potential. And these things are the things, when it comes to conscious expansion, that hold more weight. Even the likes of people going and doing, healing circles. Spiritual healing circles hold so much interference. A lot of people will talk about, integration, all of these areas. But realistically, when people go and engage with these kind of realms of experiences, people are doing healing work, right? And they're dumping their trauma, and with it, entities get released. And very few healers or practitioners or facilitators are working directly with entity interference. And so the environment becomes saturated with more and more restriction. So people will go to do conscious expansion and elevation, and they might work on their own life and release, a number of restrictions, 3, 4, 5, fantastic. But often they will pick up more interference, and so it just becomes this endless cycle, endless loop. Even with entity interference, there's a lot of talk around protection. It's not about protection. It's about alignment, creates safety, creates, higher engagement with sovereignty. Spiritual authority is actually what creates that protection, even though, again, I don't like to use the protection. It's not really. It's about expanding your energetics. It's like being at a higher level that influences can't create deregulation. I just feel like sometimes there's spiritual learnings and lessons, and they become kind of contradictory to themselves. Like, in essence, yes, we are all at this higher spiritual level interconnected, but we actually come here to be separate. That's why we come to Earth, to be separate, to have this incarnate experience, right? And so we can experience our soul, path progression, but we need to be separate first and foremost. So it's actually a process of elimination and releasing kind of connection points. And then once we really kind of up level in ourselves, then there is that place where we almost reconnect at this higher reordering. Even the likes of the collective, being connected at that level of the collective actually makes people sick. I see a lot of people that are truth seekers, and, they say that they're for this, and, they talk about the collective and all of this dysfunction, but they are just enslaved within it. Because if you are for or against something, it's classed as duality, which duality is at the level of the mind, the fourth dimension. And so they're actually enslaved in the very thing that they kind of talk about setting themselves free from. And even those for against, even if you think that you hold that higher position, all of those levels hold significant interlinks with different types of interferences that create enslavement. If anything that I'm saying now resonates at all, and you think that you kind of have, you're working really hard to create conscious expansion, awareness, and yet you kind of just have these repeat things in your life, or you're not manifesting, or you're not able to step into your highest alignment with your gifts, please, all of this information plus so much more, understanding conscious expansion, understanding the spiritual, all of this information is in my book. Conscious awareness is key. We're here to direct our consciousness favorably around what we wish to create, right? And the spiritual, we have a lot of support and a lot of guidance, but we're not allowed to be told what to do via the spiritual. Therefore, we have to direct ourselves. And then in that, there comes this kind of pathway of choice, of progression, but conscious awareness is key. So in this book, it talks all about the details about entity interference, how it attaches, the spiritual development, the mind, how the mind is the biggest place that we need to re-elevate, realign, heal, and how entity interference could be stopping you from really reaching that next highest transformation alignment. But I also then talk about if you're a healer and you wish to expand your practice and work at the highest levels of sovereignty reordering, of elevation for another, of conscious expansion, you have to work at the highest levels of entity interference because they go hand in hand. Otherwise, you can't elevate to those higher levels. So in my book, please, in the notes below, there will be notes there to be able to get your copy. But yeah, I help people to create higher alignments and transformation, and everybody's story on that path progression is very, very different. And so you have to hear the highest alignment to truth for a person. And if there is multi-dimensional interference that has either one, can actually siphon energetics, that's what they do, we're almost like a food source. Two, claim unclaimed gifts. So the things that we have this amazing potential, we do have this, everybody has this potential to step into. And yet if we're not utilizing it, it's almost up for grabs. And there is so much higher levels of interference affecting people's connections than they realize. Every single level of the next highest elevation of transformation holds this type of interference with it. And so you have to create release, you have to create a higher reordering, which is working to reinstate, rights across all dimensional levels, to reinstate sovereignty, to reinstate. Often some people are not even their own gatekeeper. So I find this a lot. Potentially people could be in suspended animation. So if you're working so hard to do conscious re-regulation, expand your consciousness, create that spiritual attainment or re-regulation, all of those beautiful, beautiful things, if you have ownership in your connection from multi-dimensional interference, interception points, you have to be able to release that, reclaim that in order to create that pathway to development. I hear a lot of people that just talk about putting this higher alignment out into the quantum, right? How healing works. It's basically like there's these templates, obviously, in our structures. Whatever we want to create, we have to set this new alignment intention, and then we have to release everything that opposes it. But if you don't have somebody that can work with these multi-dimensional influence at this high level of reordering, it goes undetected. And so people can endlessly work in the weeds of healing and never create that elevation that they're truly seeking. So if you're on this merry-go-round with healing, maybe you kind of go away and you do all of the spiritual work and then you come back and that just feels like you deregulate over and over again. Or if your physical is not matching up to the healing work that you're doing, I guarantee there will be these other restrictions that you haven't even maybe potentially considered Or maybe you know that those things are an issue. If anybody knows that they have issues with entity interference, I guarantee it is 10 times greater than what they truly realize. And everybody has their key lessons in life that they're here to elevate out of, right? And it's the pathway to true conscious engagement and expansion at the highest levels. So if your story includes entity interference, which I'm guessing listening to me and maybe watching some of my content means that you resonate with that and you understand those realms, then honestly, anyone that has issues with entity interference needs to be working at that level of re-regulation, of release, of empowerment, of stepping into being able to navigate those realms safely with spiritual authority and command. And those are the stepping stones to the highest levels of consciousness expansion. I see people go away and do, healings in big groups, and, they might be doing big healing activations and things like that, and they end up getting really, really sick or deregulated, or they have this really intense experience. And often a lot of the spiritual, communities or spiritual teachers sell it off as an activation. They sell it off as, oh, that was just Kundalini activating, or that was just this and that. And no, it's not. No, it's not. Even in seeking spiritual re-regulation, you can actually have a lot of deregulation occur because entity interference loves spiritual healing circles. They love all of those places where people are working with trauma, dumping trauma, doing all of those things. Those things go hand in hand. And so inadvertently, people can be in this never-ending cycle of either regression or almost stalling their whole conscious expansion because of these realms that they can't even navigate. They don't understand. I have endless stories and stories about my own life of working so hard and just not understanding, why am I not making headway? And when I started working at the highest levels of entity interference, it meant then I was able to do the highest spiritual re-regulation and elevation that's possible, because those two things go hand in hand together. Please know that conscious expansion holds both sides, light and dark. And understanding that world or that sea of information, even being able to understand consciously, paves the way for more and more correct re-regulation or realignment. So if you've liked this episode, please subscribe or follow. And if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next episode.